All right. So for our grand finale session, like I said earlier, we couldn't have a symposium without talking about technological breakthroughs. So our final panel of the day, technological breakthroughs on the path to a decarbonized grid. We have a fantastic panel lined up, and I couldn't be more pleased to welcome and introduce our moderator for this panel, Alex Morris. I couldn't think of a more appropriate person, right, to lead this discussion. You're highly qualified, Alex, so thank you for joining us. I think most of you know Alex, so I don't really need to say much about his background. He is the Executive Director of the California Energy Storage Alliance and is Senior Vice President at Stratagen, and he's responsible for policy and regulatory affairs. In his role at CAISO, he oversees the organization's strategy, which is committed to advocating the role of energy storage in the electric power sector. So he's been a huge advocate in all of our stakeholder meetings around long duration storage, which we've appreciated very much. So take it away, Alex.
All right, thanks, Joanne. And hi, everybody. Welcome to our session here. This is about technological breakthroughs on the path to a decarbonized grid. And I wanted to quickly have our panelists introduce themselves. You'll see there's a really good lineup. And after that, we're going to tee things up for some robust discussion and hopefully with a bit of vision about what the future is going to look like. So, Chair Hochschild, would you please start by introducing yourself?
So I'm David Hochschild, Chair of the California Energy Commission. We're an agency here in Sacramento focused on getting our state to 100% clean energy future. We have about 700 staff, $10.5 billion budget this year. And we're hiring. We have to hire about 220 people. So come talk to me afterwards if you're interested. Go ahead.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Ann Hoskins. I recently joined Generac to lead a policy group, actually to develop a policy team in their energy technology businesses. You probably all know Generac as a very significant provider of backup generators. And they've really expanded to look more broadly at other sustainable resiliency opportunities, including batteries, thermostats, smart inverters, and all sorts of other things that we're working on. So it's very exciting to work with that company. I know many of you from my previous stint leading the policy team at Sunrun, and before that as a commissioner on the Maryland Public Service Commission. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
All right, welcome.
Hi, I'm Mateo Jaramillo. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Farm Energy. We are commercializing multi-day duration energy storage. I've been banging around the energy storage space for about 20 years now, and it's been a fun ride.
And you still have hair. That's
more
great.
Fun. Yeah.
Hi, well, I'm Arnie Olson. I'm a senior partner with E3. E3 is a San Francisco-based economic consultancy. We help a variety of clients manage issues related to the clean energy transition in California and really across North America. And I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller to this panel, so I really appreciate the opportunity to be up here. Thanks.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here. So let me tee this up for the audience. So we've talked a lot about how the grid can work together, and I think yesterday focused a lot on the expanded day-ahead market, regional collaboration, and those benefits. We also saw how coordination was really beneficial in the recent heat storm. But we're going to forget all that for a moment. We're going to actually look at the fleet. And so what is the generating fleet of the future, and what's it going to be? And currently, you saw from some of the data that Mark Rothleader from the CAISO shared, there's a lot of gas in the fleet. And we have currently a fleet that's fairly gas heavy, and we'll talk about it. But in the end, we are, based on these goals, going to shift and evolve the fleet. And that's really what this is talking about today. What does that future fleet look like, and what do we need to do to make it a reality? I wanted to also come up with a silly metaphor for what the fleet really is. And, you know, when you think about what the CAISO does as the grid operator, they're always responsible for feeding everyone at the picnic. And so if you ask the person who's responsible for feeding everyone, hey, how many pizzas do you want me to order? You know, they tend to say, well, order a few extra pizzas because I want to make sure I could feed everyone. And if I give them a salad, you know, I want them to tell me, hey, is this good? Can I back off a pizza? Can I give you 3 salads instead of 1 pizza? And you end up shaping a portfolio or a meal that the operators are comfortable with. mindful of costs and things like that. So we'll talk about what the right portfolio looks like too, because that is going to be a major challenge, and California is already starting on that path, and I think all these other states are looking ahead to that as well. So to get started though, we wanted to talk about this journey we're on. So we've made a lot of progress with clean energy. We've heard about thousands of megawatts of storage. But with Arnie from E3's help, we've reviewed some of the major studies that look ahead at what the future fleet will look like. And to give you a couple numbers, some of the studies, for instance, from the CEC's SB100 study, which, and I'm going to use the reference case, not the high electrification. It says currently we have 0 offshore wind, and we're going to move towards 4.3 to 10 gigawatts of offshore wind. Currently, we have 23 megawatts of behind-the-meter solar, and we're going to move to 42 to 70 gigawatts of in-front-of-the-meter solar. And currently, on the storage side, in front of the meter, we have about 4.5 gigawatts, and we're going to move to around 40 or 40 plus gigawatts. So really, if you look at what this new fleet rollout looks like, you see that we are extremely early in the process, and there's a lot of work in front of us. And I don't want it to be daunting, but I wanted us to think, how do we achieve that deployment of resources, and what's the fleet look like? So Arnie, I wanted to start with you first. Any reaction to those numbers, and then what's a way you're thinking about how we build a fleet for the future? And then I wanted to come back to you, Chair Hochschild, about what the CEC is thinking. Go ahead, Arnie.
Yeah, I guess my first reaction to those numbers is that, wow, we've come a long way. We really have made a lot of progress. And I was around, 12, 13 years ago when we were first looking out at 33% by 2020. How is that even feasible to think about? And everyone agreed, no, you couldn't possibly get there, too many obstacles, transmission. And look where we've come. So that's a success story that we need to build on. Now, of course, we have a lot of hard work ahead of us. In fact, the road ahead of us is harder than the road behind us. But with respect to technology and the technologies that we need to get all the way through to the clean energy transition, I tend to think about it in 3 categories. There's 3 different categories of technology. The first one are technologies that we already have, are ready to go, and we just need to get moving and move as fast as we can. And I think the numbers that you quoted are from those type of technologies. So wind turbines, solar panels, lithium-ion batteries, and heat pumps. If those 4 technologies alone can get us, consultants guess, let's say 60% carbon reductions economy-wide, and maybe 80% carbon reductions in the electric grid. So just those 4 technologies alone, through widespread manufacturing and widespread deployment and implementation, and that's our task for those. Implement as much as we can, as fast as we can. There's a second category of what I might call near-ready technologies, and I will put offshore wind in this category as well. That will need some help, some policy help, some investment to make sure that we can get to the scale that's required to really leverage the capabilities of those resources. And I would put out-of-state wind in this category as well. We know what it can do. There's no technology risk there, but it's really hard to get the momentum to build the transmission that's required to bring large quantities of wind from Wyoming or New Mexico to California where we can use them. So that's the second category. And I would put some of the DERs in that category as well. We know there's lots of capability behind the meter. We're slow in leveraging all of that capability. We're about to have an awful lot of home batteries that everyone's going to plug in at night to charge for their vehicles. So there's a lot of work there to do about how to make the most of those technologies and use them to help us the most with our transition. And in the third category are technologies that we don't have yet that we know that we'll need. And here in other sectors, there's things like high heat industrial needs. We will need some fuel for those types of needs. It's long haul transport, airplanes, ships, those sorts of things. We need new technologies to decarbonize those sectors. And on the grid, what we've learned through studies here in California and really everywhere is we'll need clean, firm generation to supplement and support the wind, solar, battery heavy, portfolios that we're already gearing up to acquire and procure. And firm to me means It's a resource that's available when you need it and for as long as you need it. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be flexible. I think we've learned through work that the CAISO and others have done that flexibility is probably not going to be the biggest challenge, but the resources need to be there. And in that category, we have things like enhanced geothermal. We have things like fossil generation with carbon capture and storage. We have things like advanced nuclear, small modular reactors. We have various different types of long duration storage, which Matteo is going to talk about. And maybe more exotic things like power to fuels. And here we have hydrogen, maybe synthetic natural gas, ammonia, and some other liquid or gaseous fuel media to store electricity or energy to where we need it. So there, the picture is less clear about which of those technologies is going to emerge. We know that we need one or more of them to get all the way to a zero carbon grid in California and everywhere. And last point on that is that from when we've looked at the needs of the grid, the capacity need for those types of resources is really large. It's 30 gigawatts in California through 2050, given all the new load that we expect through electrification. And so that's 40%, let's say, of the peak load that we expect. And the numbers are similar. In cold climates, it's even more, maybe 60% of peak needs to be met with some kind of a firm resource. So it's a really large need. So in order to meet that, we need to plant a lot of seeds and really invest in a lot of technologies that can mature and develop and bring them into maturity over the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay, so the categories for everybody's benefit. Category 1 is stuff that's ready now, let's move forward with it. Category 2 is stuff that we think we're for sure going to need, so let's really help it. And then category 3 is we're not sure what else we need, so let's incubate things. And I think, David, that's a good handoff point for you. Which one of those categories is most exciting to you and why? And what are you guys doing, especially on categories 2 and 3?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if I could, with your permission, I just want to recognize Elliot Mainzer, the CEO of CAISO, and the board and staff. We could ask all the CAISO board and staff and leadership to stand up. We just want to thank you for bringing us together here and organizing this conference. It's great to be back in person. And let me just begin with a little story. So at the end of the Schwarzenegger administration, the legislature and the governor there was some friction there, and the bill that had been pending really got pushed into the first year of Jerry Brown's tenure, which was the 33% RPS. And I happened to be in Sacramento on the day that was voted on in the legislature. I went up to the gallery, and there was a legislator in the back who took the bill and threw it up in the air, and like confetti, the pages are falling, and he was saying, "This is crazy, it'll never happen. Renewables are a pipe dream," and so on. And I just want to observe, that was a decade ago. So today, we all know that alternative energy is now the wrong word to use to describe renewables. Actually, fossil is alternative. Renewables are mainstream. We're getting almost 2/3 of our electricity in California from renewable sources of energy, and the future looks very bright now with 10-year tax credits for solar, for wind, for geothermal, for energy storage, electric heat pumps, electric vehicles. And we're the biggest market for most of those technologies. And we now have 100% clean energy mandate, which has been copied now. 21 states have that. The president has set that as the goal for the country. And I do just want to remind everybody, we are a postcard from the future for energy. And we have a really proud and beautiful history of that. Utility scale wind was born in California, Altamont Pass, the first large scale project in the world. Utility scale solar, again, here in Sacramento, the first large scale projects in the world. Electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and now energy storage. And it's a great legacy, and we got to keep going. I just want to note again, we passed in 2015, we passed Brazil to become the 7th biggest economy in the world, then France later that year. And in 2018, we passed the UK with Brexit to become the number 5. And then the news just came out 2 weeks ago. We're on track to pass Germany in the first quarter next year to be the 4th largest economy in the world. The fact that we can decarbonize as we're doing this, and the message that sends and the narratives that disrupts is incredibly exciting for me, because I think we're the engine of the solutions our world needs on climate and energy. So at the Energy Commission, we have a really robust program to support sort of seed planting for new chemistries. I'll maybe just start with a meeting you and I had this week with some of your members around long duration storage. So we have a $380 million program to support long duration storage chemistry. So this is 8-hour to 100-hour chemistries. Of the 4.5 gigawatts of storage that we have now, that's almost entirely lithium, 4-hour lithium chemistry. And by the way, that is amazing. And I want to observe there too, 3 years ago, we had 200 megawatts. Now we're at 4,400 megawatts. That is actually 4,500, excuse me. That is 2 Diablos in 3 years, right? And we're trying to get to 15,000 megawatts by the end of the decade. But, we need, now that the Governor Newsom has accelerated the 100% law, so we have to get to 90% carbon-free electricity by 2035, we need a lot more storage, and we need long duration storage, the kind of stuff that Matteo and others are doing to add to the portfolio. So that's probably the part that excites me the most, because I think that really gives you the flexibility that you need. I will say reliability to me is a 100% solvable problem, but we have to have the right portfolio of carbon-free resources and be nimble. So that's probably the piece I'm most interested in.
That's great. And can you just speak a little bit to the offshore wind piece? Because I want to give people a sense of what are the seeds that are being planted and how the state's approaching that.
Yeah, I will tell you, in my tenure at the Energy Commission, which is coming up on 10 years now, that was the most exciting and most meaningful vote I've taken. That was August 10th. We were asked by the legislature and the governor to set the state goal for offshore wind. Long debate and discussion and deliberation, a lot of input from colleagues at PUC, CAISO, and stakeholders across the state, and we ended up setting it at 25 gigawatts. That represents over $100 billion of new investment. Offshore wind, for those of you who are not following that industry really closely, it's booming. Europe installed 5 gigawatts last year. The resource is sort of the perfect yin-yang for solar. So when solar is ramping down, offshore wind production is going up. And we will get manufacturing. We'll get blade and tower manufacturing in California as a result of that. And I asked NREL to do an analysis of how would offshore wind have performed during the September heat storm that we had. And the answer, particularly on the North Coast, was excellent. So it will help support reliability. And its capacity factor is much, much better than wind on land, which is roughly 35 to 40% for wind on land, closer to 55% for offshore. And happy to share that on December 6th, the very first lease sale for offshore wind on the West Coast is happening. That's here in California. We're doing 2 sites, which will be divided up into 5 zones. So we'll have 5 different winners for that. And then, we begin implementation. I think, the moment we're in, generally as a state right now, is what I'd call the great implementation. We are done debating whether to do this stuff, and it's really all about getting steel in the ground, getting the stuff built, really focus on making the process friction-free, because we have a lot to build as we're electrifying everything. We're adding about 1,000 electric vehicles a day in California. That's going to drive demand up, and we have a big push now on building electrification as well. So we need these resources as fast as we can get them.
So Alex, sorry if I can chime in here.
Yeah.
I'm sort of stuck on the picnic analogy. I've really been thinking about that since you mentioned it. And I was hoping that you would identify what each of the resources is in the picnic. The best one I came up for offshore wind was like a full pig roast. Takes a long time to get going. High startup cost, but then it feeds a lot of people.
Yes, all right. I'm vibing on you. Let's go with this. All right.
Just identify. I'm trying to think about what long duration storage is. I don't have any good analogy there.
I think sort of my metaphor in my head was we started with sort of pizzas, things that maybe weren't that healthy, which is okay. Yeah. And then gradually we're sort of adding Brussels sprouts and, things. That's probably the metaphor in my head.
Fruit salad.
Yeah, sort of getting things a little healthier. But go ahead, Matteo, and just share about the stuff you're working on and where you think you guys will fit in this meal, so to speak.
Well, you're going to eat it later. That's the point.
It's the take-home box.
Yeah,
okay,
the take-home box. But it's still warm when you have it. So we work on multi-day storage. So I use that term to distinguish between several hours at a time to get from lithium ion. And I fully agree with the sentiments that David shared. Lithium ion is fantastic, and we should build as much of it as we possibly can. And that's true for all the resources that we're considering here. All the ones that Arnie listed, for example. We should bring all of that to bear. But multi-day storage does have a very interesting role to play. And my company, Form Energy, does a lot of analytics around this. So I say this from sort of a quantitative understanding of it. Having different types of storage resources with very different characteristics is how you get to a lower cost system overall, because they're doing different things on the system. It's not dissimilar, in fact, from the natural gas resources that we have today. We've got sort of low efficiency, relatively high cost peakers, and then much higher efficiency, much higher capex cost, but lower opex cost, or delivered cost, combined cycle plants. And the combination of those two things gets us a low cost system. So we think about that, how multi-day storage fits into the resource mix in that way. It'll never be 100% of the storage needs, right? It'll never be, 50% of the system, right? But it will have a very important role to play. And all of our modeling says it's between maybe 10 and 15% of sort of the rated system capacity you would want optimally to be coming from this kind of resource. So that's how we see it. It will take time, and sort of on the same timelines that we're anticipating bringing offshore wind into the California market. That's sort of the same timeline that sort of we see, in my company, bringing these newer technologies to bear in the market and at a commensurate scale at the same time. So it all feels very feasible. There's no magic pixie dust that's required here. It requires a lot of capital, and it requires the right market structures and the right incentives to get it in at the higher prices that, of course, you have to tolerate as you're ramping up a new product in a new industry.
I like that. We'll come back to sort of business signals, but you've spoken to the long duration storage. Can we jump behind the meter, Ann, for a moment? And what are you guys cooking up over there? And where do you think that segment's going to go? And if you don't mind, speak to virtual power plants as well.
And what part of the picnic is it?
It's a potpourri. I am so excited right now. First, really excited about California. I have to give a lot of kudos to the chairman. I moved to California about six years ago. Finally feel like I'm really Californian, but it's great to be from California because of all the leadership and everything that we've seen. And so it's just an incredible time right now with the IRA that passed federally, the infrastructure bill. A lot of that money is going to make its way, hopefully, to the states around the country. It's absolutely going to supercharge standalone back the meter, behind the meter storage, as well as combined solar and storage. And so I think my message is that there's a lot more we can do. Maybe it's in category one, Arnie, a lot more we can do with the technology we have right now with distributed resources. And it's growing fast too. I mean, maybe the aggregate numbers don't seem as high, but when I arrived at Sunrun 6 years ago, we weren't using batteries yet. So this has all happened very quickly. Mm-hmm. I think during 2020, the numbers are from CAISO, there were 20,000 battery customers. Behind the meter battery customers. There were 80,000 when we had the event in September. So it's a pretty significant rate of growth, but it's going to take off. And we should be really building that into our planning more than we are. And then also making sure that we have the right compensation structures to encourage and recognize the capacity value they provide as well as the energy values they provide. But I don't want to just talk about batteries because batteries are key, but one of the things I'm learning at Generac is we bought ecobee, the thermostat, and we heard about thermostats this morning. And so during that event in September, ecobee was in a trial with SDG&E. And I think we had like 20% of our customers were enrolled in that utility program, and they all helped in terms of providing demand response. But 80% of our customers, and ecobee has hundreds of thousands of thermostat. Like there's a lot of thermostats, and that's just one of them, right? We talked about a lot, Nest, others as well. So there's a lot of thermostats, automatic thermostats in California. 80% were not in a utility program, but ecobee went ahead and created its own voluntary program where it was basically an opt-out program. Okay, so when you do opt-out versus opt-in, you get a lot more participation. So 60% of their remaining customers participated, and they had the opportunity to opt out any time in the middle if they needed to. Only 5% did. So we had a tremendous participation rate of these thermostats. So one of the things I'm very excited about is through the legislation that passed at the end of August, it's now opening up the opportunity for customers with thermostats to participate in these kind of programs and get compensated outside of a utility program. Love the utility programs, but we don't want that to be a constraint because the need is so great. Okay. And I think this is just an example of, we have technology that we can use, and particularly given the concerns coming into next summer, we should just all really focus on what can we do to provide, fair but really effective and quick incentives for people who have invested in batteries and have invested in thermostats and now have the technology. So quickly on the VPPs, one of the other companies that Generac acquired was Enbala. So maybe you probably know it more as Enbala. Enbala is a grid services provider, both for utilities, but also for does some of it on our own with the battery and even generator customers that we have. And so I think that we've just sort of scratched the surface of what we can do of using the power of aggregation, right? And we saw some of this, and there were stories, I think of things that Tesla had done. Other companies had done it as well in September. But if we could work together with CAISO and with the utilities and with the commission, the CPUC, to really think about that now is the time that we find a way to aggregate and optimize the use of these DERs. And again, very excited that coming out of the legislation, I think there's like 3 big programs at the CEC right now that I'll be writing comments on later today. But I mean, it's very exciting because it's a recognition that we have a need for distributed level resources. And now we have the technology, the grid services technology, to make sure that, the wholesale markets can see those and can take advantage. So.
Okay. And so that's great. So we talked a little bit about long duration storage and then behind the meter. So Arnie, we're going to plant 1,000 seeds of different stuff. And then your job is to do meal planning through a model. How the heck are you going to do that? And do you even know what technologies are coming to plug into the model? And let's say the CAISO called you and said, we want to know if the meal you're preparing is sufficient. Show us the numbers. I mean, how do you approach that problem? Because I think there's a direct linkage between that planning cycle and the technologies that get signaled in California.
Yeah, I think your last clause was maybe the harder one, is which technologies do we plug into the model and at what price points and over what time period, especially with some of the emerging technologies where there's not a long commercial record of PPAs that have been signed and projects that have brought online. So it's necessarily a bit speculative, and especially when you're modeling over a long time period, the jaws of uncertainty can get fairly wide. So I think modeling is really important, and E3 is working under a CEC grant with Form actually as a partner on how do we advance the state's energy planning models to better incorporate long duration storage, and along the way, hydrogen, round trip, power to fuels as well. We'll be able to model that. So that's been really exciting. I think it's important to improve our models. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay.
Maybe just to add on to that, I think, yes, it's important to model technologies correctly with price inputs and that kind of thing, but at least as important is the structure of the model itself, so that it is sensitive enough with high enough fidelity to incorporate any of the things that we put in it. So it has to be hourly level modeling that happens, and it has to be able to incorporate non-standard meteorological years. So not just a 1 in 10, but a 1 in wherever we call it, a 1 in 100 now, and make plans, have a model that takes that level of fidelity into account. That's probably the most important thing. And then we can decide which technologies and which price points and everything else we put in there. But if the model is structurally not correct, you're going to get wrong answers no matter what you put in there.
And so we're working on that part. Maybe just to add on one last thing. Then. Yeah. So the model is in effect, it kind of assumes a central planner, a centrally optimized planner and procurer of resources, everything that's to minimize costs from the societal perspective. It's not actually how we acquire resources in California or really anywhere. The way that we really acquire resources is individual LSEs, CCAs, IOUs are the ones that are signing the checks, issuing the RFPs. So we have to translate the signals that come out of the model into market signals that give them the incentive to collectively procure the optimal set of resources that meets our reliability goals and our operational needs and our long-term clean energy policy goals. And so that institutional and market framework is the other key component to that. And to do that, we have to understand what services we need and price them right so that all the market players have the right financial incentives.
Okay, so then I want to check on the business signal. So let's say you've teed up the menu. Hey, California, here's probably what the meal looks like. Does that, as our industry folks, does that work for you guys? Is that enough to tell you to focus on California to serve it, or what? How do you make that calculus? Because in the end, I think we saw 26,000 megawatts of gas we're still carrying California in the recent heat storm. We know load's going to increase. So we know we're going to need a lot of new resources to come in if California is going to achieve its goals. So how do you react, and what signals do you guys need?
Well, I think that, as many of you probably heard, big order just was released from the CPUC this morning, have not fully reviewed it. So I can't really comment on it, but certainly a lot of work has gone into this, the net metering order, but a lot of work has gone in the last few years in California, and other proceedings that are outstanding, looking at, in fact, there is now another proceeding on flexible rates. And flexible rates are really important for all of this, right? Because, as we get more electric vehicles coming onto the system, which is very exciting, we want to make sure that they're charged at the right time. I mean, one of the things that I think we do have the technology for, some of the things, again, we're working at Generac, is just, a lot of this should be able to be automated, right? It shouldn't have to be that complicated for people to remember what rate system they're on. And I think we have that technology and we can work together on that. But getting the right rates to make sure that people are not charging, during the peak time when we have this problem, and that they're compensated when they share at the peak time, I think that's, extremely important. But the other side of it beyond rates that I meant to bring up earlier is we just really have to get the friction out of the system. One of the biggest challenges with storage is the delays with interconnection, the delays in upgrading, all the things we want to do with storage, with electric vehicles, they often end up requiring these main panel upgrades. It doesn't sound very sexy, but it's a huge delay in cost. And then also local permitting. And I just read, I think it was in one of the PV Mag things this morning, that Europe, because of the problem they're having with energy this winter, have decided to do an emergency order to require permitting within 30 days. And, for every kind of construction on a built environment. And I think that, similar things have happened in California when we've had these emergencies where we've then had to run diesel generators and the like. But we could think the same thing for this period between now and next summer of how could we really expedite. And certainly a lot of good things happened through the CEC and the legislature and giving incentives for local permitting officials to do solar app, and we've made progress, but I'm thinking, can we supercharge that a little to really make it easier, recognizing that this is something that's essential and we have the technology, but there's just these interconnection upgrades and permitting costs that are slowing it down, because I've been trying to think about, with all the exciting things there, how do we meet the need of California for next summer? And that means you need to sell the systems, get them permitted, install them. That's soon. So that would be just a really concrete thing that we could all work on to make sure we have what we need next summer.
Okay, 30-day permitting, David, you got that? Wait, let's hear from you.
I look for two things, and fortunately they're already there. But one is just the support of the state to very clearly provide the signal that this technology is desired to happen in the market. David mentioned the source of funds that's out there for long duration storage demonstration projects, right? That's sort of very unequivocally the signal that yes, this state wants it, is willing to support it in the early stages when it is more expensive. And the other is the market design. So we can do all the modeling, and we can sort of have the technologies sort of generically defined by different specifications or costs. And then we need a market design that actually reflects that. And so in general, we seem to be converging on a more precise definition of what clean firm actually means. And that's probably something like this effective load carrying capacity term that gets applied for reliability. What we're really talking about is reliability. That's what it comes down to, right? We need decarbonized reliability. And so having that be a product in the market needs to be a feature of the market that we want.
And Matteo, can you take us into one of those conversations? You're in a meeting room and you're talking to a potential fund that may be interested in supporting you. And what does it take? What signals are they looking for to say, yes, Matteo, I think your technology is good and you found the right market? Can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we need to be a credible story that's heard, right, about the technology. What are the fundamental entitlements there? How much progress have you made with what kind of capital to date? What is the team? What do your commercial off-takers look like? How do you understand the market? Those sort of basic table stakes for that. The other is scalability, frankly. Nobody wants to work on dead-end pathways, whether they're policy pathways or they're technology pathways. And if you can't scale the solution, back to my earlier point, it doesn't really matter much. And so, we're talking about massive numbers here in California, 11,000 megawatts of storage that's going to come online, and a large portion of that presumably will be long duration storage. So having a very clear line of sight to how you deliver that technology in a relevant time frame is the other piece of it, right? Again, that scale, but 20 to 30 years from now doesn't do you much good. And it has to show up in the right time.
And where is California doing a good job or not on those signaling issues?
Well, California has done a very good job on those issues. 2514 was the seminal piece of policy there or legislation rather, for the energy storage world. It jump-started so much. And so, for example, the work out of the CEC is building on all of that and knows what it means to provide the right signals, and the market will respond, right, if you provide them clearly enough. And so that we see that already happening. Is there going to be something out of the PUC that mirrors 2514, but for this new phase? I don't know, we'll see. But I also know that California institutionally understands that and is already starting to take steps that, to me, are very, very encouraging there, like what the CEC is already doing.
I mean, it's very different, and the long duration's critical for us as we go forward. But, one of the strengths of these aggregation abilities now with all the virtual power plants and just the ability to have centralized management of these resources is you can have people and small businesses and community centers that have behind the meter storage, and it does last more than 4 hours, right? Like, we know how to make it last multiple days. We've seen that now in Texas and outages. We've seen it here. It takes management, it takes aggregation, it takes really optimization. And so I think one of the things we have to figure is, as you look at this planning, when do we think we're going to have your long duration storage? I know you'd like it sooner rather than later. We do have this lithium-ion battery technology now. We do have the technology to be able to aggregate and manage that. And we should be able to realize and put that together and see that it is more firm than anyone wants to sort of say. And we, and that we have options that are going to help us through the next few years while we're trying to get the longer term, while we're trying to get offshore wind, which, by the way, one of my last votes of the Maryland Public Service Commission was approving the financing for their offshore wind. So it does happen, and it's coming, right? But it's not going to be here by next summer. So that's one of the things that I hope we can all sort of see is that some of the, I don't remember what the pizza was. Like, I don't know if we were I love pizza, so if the DERs are pizza, that's fine. But, they're more valuable than I think they're recognized for. And that's, I guess, the message I want to leave is how can we take what they have and then extract even more value with the technology that we have.
Yeah.
Slices of pizza placed in different places.
We can go with this. So, David, hearing that, do you feel like you guys are doing a great job of signaling sort of as the state's ambassador on this? How do you think you're doing, and what else could be done?
Well, hopefully we've signaled, that preferred resources are the path. I think we can do a lot better on permitting, and much of the permitting for this stuff is actually at the local level. And there was a good template a few years ago with some of the accelerated solar permitting, but we need to do that for storage and really make it friction free. And, I think just elevate generally the vision that everything that connects to the grid needs to be a good citizen of the grid, and that, it's a different model now, and it's a very participatory model. There's something really exciting about that. One thing we haven't talked about is vehicle to grid, which is another really exciting thing. Just, for context, the introduction earlier this year of the Ford F-150 Lightning, I think, was a really important milestone because that vehicle class actually reaches parts of the state and the country that I don't think EVs had reached before. And, that's equivalent to 10 Tesla Powerwalls, right? It's a lot. It's a 130 kilowatt hour battery. A lot of juice in those. And so we are doing some pilots now on V2G. And I'm optimistic even that some of the existing EVs that are out there can have software upgrades. And in fact, finally, Tesla, I believe next month, is going to start enabling their vehicles to do that, which is also a big development. So That's an important part of it, particularly because transportation, as you all know, has now far surpassed the power sector to be our biggest source of pollution. And so the governor's all in on an electric vehicle future. We have the executive order requiring 100% of new vehicle sales to be zero emission electric by 2035. And we also want them to be part of the grid solution, along with all the DG and storage we've been talking about.
And maybe just to provide some numbers on that, because I used to be at Tesla, so I thought about this a lot. But so there's about 20 million passenger cars in California. For every million passenger cars that are electric, that represents about 10 gigawatts of demand or of supply. And by 2030, we will have probably a larger rated amount of power in cars available than we will stationary.
So this makes, I want to introduce something, and then Arnie, what you're saying is this is kind of a new food you're introducing at the table. So let's say you're traveling, you're with your kids, and you're like, hey, eat this. And they've never seen it before. I mean, how do you get them comfortable with eating the food they're unfamiliar with? And I think that does go to the operators of the grid want comfort with sort of what's going to feed the picnic, and sort of where are we in that journey. I think that's another area of development. Arnie, when you look at V2G or V1G, whichever, what level of certainty do you have that it's going to show up in the models? And I think that's ultimately what the operators would want to understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure about in terms of the models. I was going to say, just building on something that I said earlier, and then what Ann said about rates and what the incentives are on the price signals. I think it's been hard enough so far to have a wholesale market that sends all the right and good and efficient price signals. It's another step to send those same signals or efficient signals at the retail level and to the distributed resources. And it's going to be really important. I mean, Mateo's pointed out it's either 10 gigawatts of demand or it's 10 gigawatts of supply.
Yeah.
If we send dumb price signals to the people that own those resources, they're going to use them to do dumb things. They're going to respond to those signals in a way that benefits them and doesn't necessarily benefit the system. So what we need to do is send them smart signals so that they can do things that benefit the grid and benefit them. And we're a little bit of a ways from that. So we need to crack the rate design nut so that we can really unleash this incredible new resource that is about to come at us like way faster than we're ready for. And that's why I had that as a category 2, just to kind of signal that we have some work to do. I think the technology is ready or near ready, but we have some work to do as a policy bodies, as an industry to harness that and get the most out of it that we can.
But I think one of the things with the complexity is that's why you can use these third parties, of which there are now a number, right, that can manage that for the customer. Because I've heard repeatedly, concerns from regulators about, are we going to be able to count on the customer showing up? Are they going to understand? It would be great. There'll be some out there who do and that want to manage everything they do. But now we have the ability that we can aggregate and manage these and make it pretty seamless for customers. So if you do have a customer who has electrified their home and they've gotten a heat pump and they've I'm getting an electric fireplace, so I'm pretty proud of that. But anyway, whatever you want, right, to have controlled, it's all going to be able to be controlled, potentially from your thermostat or from your, the same thing with your EV. And that's the future that's not far away. And especially in a place like California, which is known for innovation and technology, that just shouldn't be a problem for us to have to worry about whether we're going to be able to manage these resources at that level. I will agree with you that it's not all happening now. We don't have all the rates in place, but I think it's very surmountable and something that would be worthy of, some of the whatever, a lot of money that's out there now across California to try to get us to a more resilient place, that thinking about how we can enable and recognize the value of those kind of services, I think would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think just my reaction is another technology area is we want really accurate price signals, but those tend to be complicated. And during the heat storm, a good example is I have a neighbor who's very smart, aware person. She was just out of town and her air conditioning was on the entire week. So not helpful. I didn't break into her house to turn her AC on. But it was one of those things where if she'd had technology or there'd been an intermediary like an aggregator to manage that, it would have solved that problem. And I think that's another area of sort of seeds to plant is we could see more development there. Any quick reactions? Because I also want to jump.
That's the junk food you want to get out of your diet, I guess.
Yeah, all right.
Keeping with your analogy.
So let's talk about hydrogen. And Arnie, where do you categorize hydrogen on your sort of 1, 2, 3 spectrum? And anything you'd want to tee up for the audience about what hydrogen even is in terms of the grid's future?
It's definitely a 3. There's, with the IRA and with what's happening in Europe, there is a lot of money flowing into the sector. So that's the good news, is I think we're going to learn a lot over the next 5 to 10 years about what its specific roles are. And it definitely fills a niche that all of the pathways and grid models show is there. If you have a 30 gigawatt need for some form of clean, firm capacity in California, you're not going to build 30 gigawatts of nuclear to fill that, even if we could build it in California, which we can't. You're not going to build 30 gigawatts of CCS to solve that. You need some kind of a peaker, relatively low capital cost, the CT, or if it's fuel cell, and you almost don't care how much the fuel costs because you only need it during those most critical times. So it fills that niche very well in terms of the models. And I think with the IRA, it's going to get a big boost in terms of the clean energy that's needed to create the green hydrogen. The cost of wind and solar is going to come down a lot. I think we can expect to see the electrolyzer industry sort of, scale up the manufacturing and hopefully start to march down that same experience curve that we've seen in the past from wind and solar and lithium-ion batteries. But there are some challenges. It's a very finicky, small molecule to corral. Even if we can make it very cheaply, can we deliver it to where we need it, and can we store it for the amount of time for when we might need it? And there are some opportunities like the Delta project in Utah where you can do underground storage or where the geology is favorable. That really helps a lot. So it's out there, it's on the table as one of those options. I think we need to invest in that and the number of other options to complete the energy transition.
Yeah,
go
ahead. Yeah.
Generac just started distributing a hydrogen fuel cell for sort of commercial operations. Like Netflix wanted to have a clean solution that wasn't noisy for making their films. So there are applications. It's just very expensive. And I think that, it's good to bring in these different, have these technological solutions available. My sense on hydrogen, another exciting thing that's happening that probably has big implications for California, is there's a lot of work happening on how to use hydrogen for ships, and all the ports that we have. And particularly we saw that, right, with COVID, where we had all those, and the supply chain shortages, a lot of work going on in Singapore. And that could be very interesting, I think, for California. But what sometimes worries me when I hear about hydrogen is, we're doing so much work on electric vehicles, like to make sure that when we're trying to come up with these different options, that they're not somehow competing with each other in such a way that we don't make progress on either. And I think hydrogen's just challenging, a little more challenging.
I will share a little bit. So the Energy Commission has put more money into hydrogen infrastructure than any other country on earth, right? I mean, we've actually made huge investments. I do want to say there is definitely a future for hydrogen, but it is not going to replace natural gas in every instance. It's actually, basically the way I see it is like the stuff that is difficult to electrify is really well suited for that. But there's a whole bunch of things like, electric heat pump water heaters work great. They're easy to install. And I think, that on building decarb, it's going that way. Passenger vehicles, okay. There's 475 announced models of zero emission vehicles coming to world market by Q4 of 2024. 472 of those are electric. Okay, so on passenger vehicles, I think that ship has sailed. But I think there are, some of the applications you were talking about, Arnie, and even, potentially shipping and so forth, things that do not lend themselves to electrification is where we ought to be focused. And if we don't do that, I am concerned about stranded assets. And I think that's something we need to be very thoughtful about, is making sure the hydrogen investments we're making are for areas of the energy space where there's a credible pathway.
Yeah, and I think you kind of bring us back to the who pays for all this question. So we're talking about achieving these goals. We want to do it as smartly as possible, but it still will be expensive, David. And so from the state standpoint, how is that landing with you guys? And is there a game plan?
Well, I would put the question back to you because you're more on the front lines with the hydrogen hub. And I think that's actually one of the ways we do drive the cost down. I know you've been really close to that, we were talking in the back. I don't know if you could share a little bit more.
Yeah, and I see Angelina over there. Angelina's overseeing, there is a hydrogen hub effort spooling up in California. Acronym is ARCHES. I actually can't remember what it really stands for, but so the California, I know, will be pursuing some of the $2 billion or $8 billion total federal funding opportunities for hubs. And I think the spirit of that is to get a lot of the stakeholders together, get a sort of joined up effort so that you can get scale on the hydrogen and start to really accelerate that economy and bringing prices down, is my understanding. So that's Angelina, also a CAISO governor. So Angelina, you must be very busy. But I wanted to share a possible future on this note, which is imagine some of the hydrogen does go into hard to electrify sectors. And then imagine a lot of the lithium ion really gets pulled into the automotive space, which we know is a strong pull for lithium. Who fills the gap? And how do we make sure those technologies are successful?
Well, for one, there's a lot of lithium. So lithium can serve automotive and stationary applications. And just I'll share a little bit about Lithium Valley for those of you who are not tracking this super closely. We have an incredible resource here in California. 600,000 ton annual capacity. The global market last year was 400,000 tons, but the global market is growing quite rapidly. But it's by far the greenest way to produce lithium in the world. Almost all the lithium in our electric cars and our batteries and cell phones today comes from 4 countries, Chile and Argentina, where it's produced with these massive evaporation ponds that take 12 to 18 months to produce the lithium, and hard rock mining in Australia and China, where it's about 6 months. The process in California is 45 minutes. It's in a superheated geothermal brine that's being circulated for these power plants. You're withdrawing 250 parts per million, and then it gets pumped down back into the underground reserve. Very green, very light footprint process, and we are going to scale that. We're putting in a lot of resources to support lithium development in
I want to tip my hat. Plus, they've branded it Lithium Valley, so good branding. Yeah, it sounds clever. We need more of that. But go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
But no, that is going to be a major resource, and we're planning not just for lithium development, but the vision is really to attract back co-located battery manufacturing that's on site with and there's a big process savings because typically what you do when you produce lithium in a brine is you then reduce it down to a solid and you evaporate it, you put it on a truck, you send it to the battery factory where the first thing they do is put it back into a liquid. And so actually you can save, if you just transport in a pipe, there's a huge process savings there. So that's a big piece of the strategy. And then on the hydrogen hub, we fully support that. I just want to be clear, what has happened this year with energy budgets and for preferred resources is a once in a generation moment. This is a blue moon kind of moment. We got this colossal new infusion of funds for climate solutions at the state level, coupled with the IRA and the infrastructure bill and the chance to have a hydrogen hub. I really believe those dollars will go further and be more effective if they're here in California because of the ecosystem that we have. And that's with utilities and manufacturers and the private sector and the state, local government coming together. And so we're really going to do everything we can to have those monies land here.
Yeah. Well, one thing you did recently was you started authorizing some of the spend from a $380 million long duration program. So I think it's quite noteworthy. You already have approved 1 or 2 projects, including on flow batteries. So you are sort of, Arnie, to your metaphor, planting more seeds or watering the seeds for those technologies. And I think that's a really important, I call that long duration energy storage. And we're really seeing that as an area of extreme development and focus on the industry side. And in CISA, we're okay with competition. And so they will eventually have to be ready for prime time, which means competing against lithium and other solutions. And that means they have to have insurance and all these things that go along with being a boring, mature technology and ready to transact quickly in business. So Matteo, going to you on that front of commercialization, what is it? How hard a journey is it? I mean, we're watering the seeds, we're trying to support you, we're signaling to you, but there's still kind of that rigor. What's it take? And is there just attrition in that process that's normal, or is there a clean way to make sure that's successful?
Yeah, it's hard is the short answer.
Okay.
I've been at it with my current company for about 5 years. We have 2 years left before we have a commercial product that we're delivering. That will be the bankable product, though. There's a warranty on that. There's insurance on that warranty. There's we've passed all the independent engineering assessments. It's fully UL listed, right? All of it.
Uh-huh.
And that's roughly how long it takes. The old rule of thumb used to be 10 years for a new technology to come to market for energy storage, and there were precious few of those. And we're trying to do it in about 7 years, and that's at scale. But it's hard. There's a huge flourishing in the market, right? Because people do see an opportunity, just in general, and then very specifically for non-lithium alternatives. I happen to be in the camp that lithium-ion will scale up massively to meet all the demand that you could possibly have. So I don't think we'll be in that sort of scarcity period with lithium-ion, but there will be other attempts to sort of compete with it in that range. You mentioned flow batteries, and there are other forms, thermal, mechanical, other kinds of things. We'll also build as much pumped hydro as we can possibly build. Let's not forget the massive sort of incumbent there. So again, every resource that can be brought to bear in the market will, and the new folks, we've got to go down a treacherous path to get to full commercialization. There really aren't any shortcuts. So
Okay.
it's hard, and we need the support.
Yeah, well, I don't want us to end on too somber a note, but I do think our work is cut out for us. I wanted to just wrap up, and thanks everybody for listening. What's one piece of advice you would have for the audience or the CAISO about how to make sure the seeds we plant in Category 3 are successful? So, David, can I put you on the hot seat? You first.
I was trying to come up with a food analogy. I would just say one thing we haven't talked about today is lifting up disadvantaged communities.
Okay.
The storage project that we approved 2 weeks ago, which is our first big, large-scale, long-duration storage project, 60 megawatt-hour project, we did on a Native American tribe, the Viejas Band of Kumeyaay Indians. This is our 8th tribal microgrid. We have a big program to support tribal energy sovereignty here in California, and that's worth a round of applause. It's a great project, and the team worked incredibly hard. But we have to own that collectively. That as we build this clean energy future, we are providing opportunities and benefits to communities that have borne the worst of the pollution and the impacts, and that's a core part of the strategy. I think the governor and the legislature are all in on that vision. I really believe when we do that, that will also be, in addition to our clean energy goals, part of the model and part of the legacy that spreads. And so I think that's the main hope I have as we go forward. We're very intentional in that commitment.
Okay. Matteo, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, continue with all the great work at CEC for standing up these newer technologies, but I would say precisely define reliability.
Okay, interesting. Good one. Arnie?
Just briefly, I would say we need to be creative, we need to be nimble, we need to be flexible, and we should be slow to rule things out forever.
Interesting. Okay, so careful decision making. And Anne?
Yeah, I think one of the things is how can we have a lot of really great and creative leadership from different agencies in California. And as I said, I came here 6 years ago. It took about 6 years for me to understand how to get through them all. So it's pretty complicated. And so for good reason, because we're trying to do things that are really hard here and be the leader. But I think about, I was really fortunate when I was at Sunrun. I had a big team of really talented people. Now I'm at a company where I'm sort of starting that up. It's a big company, but they haven't been as engaged in policy. And it takes a lot of work and resources to really engage and participate. And I know there's, a lot of work here being done to try to ensure able participation by different groups. But to the extent the different energy-related, CAISO, CPUC, CEC, even CARB, can think about it through that lens of like, how do the new participants in the market actually get to understand what's going on, share their expertise, and then take full advantage of it. I think deserves a little more thought, because we really, at this time, we need all these bright people, we need all the entrepreneurs, and we need them not to have to spend a ton of money to hire a ton of lobbyists and representatives to understand what's going on. So
good.
that would be my
Good
suggestion.
tip. So we're out of time. I wanted to say thanks so much. I learned a lot. So let's give them a round of applause.